Is gardening for everyone? In a word, no, it's not. But I do believe that for people with the time or the space, that gardening can be a fun and healthy hobby that's actually more accessible than you think. Madam and Mr. Co-Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and welcome guests. The philosopher Bertrand Russell once said, "I made an odd discovery. Every time I talk to a savant, I feel quite sure that happiness is no longer a possibility. And yet, when I talk to my gardener, I'm convinced of the opposite." And my own personal experience has shown me that time and time again. Let me start at the beginning. Rewind to May 1998, which was the year that I decided to plant my first small, but pretty ambitious vegetable garden. I had corn, potatoes, lettuce, and tomatoes, and a variety of other things. And I have to say that it did really, really well. Although I did quickly learn that when a package of seeds tells you to plant the vegetables a certain distance apart, they really mean it. I planted everything way too close together. And I just figured that I could do better than them, because when you're planting little tiny specks into the ground, the idea that they have to be 5 or 10 or 25 centimeters apart does kind of sound a little bit ludicrous. But the little specks actually grow really quickly into full-grown vegetables. And I ended up having to pull more than half of them out so that everything would have space to grow. As funny as it sounds, it was actually that experience that convinced me of how much I really loved gardening. I was like heartbroken to have to pull the tiny plants out, thinking that I had kind of killed them. You know, like if I had given them enough space in the first place, they would have been able to grow into full vegetables, right? So I kind of cut their life a little bit short. Anyway, since then, I've kept gardening every year because I do find it a very calming, relaxing, and like heartwarming activity to actually plant the seeds yourself and grow your own food. Now, in this day and age, there are a lot of other reasons why people, even in big cities like Toronto, where we live, are taking an interest in growing their own vegetables as well. Reasons you might have heard, things like sustainability of our food supply, what has actually worked its way into our food. But of course, the main reason that people have taken up gardening is because it's cool. Now, I might be a little bit biased, but I do believe that if you walk into any given bookstore, you'll see flocks of men and women checking out manuals on all sorts of homemade things, woodworking, knitting, and gardening. Now, I know that in these days, it's not enough for your hobby just to be cool or just to be delicious. So gardening, if you're going to do it, it's hard work. It has to bring more than just food to the table. I'm sure you've all heard of physiotherapy, and there might even be some people who've heard of animal-assisted therapy, which is where the practitioners use loving pets to help people on the road to rehabilitation. I'd like to tell you tonight about the Canadian Horticultural Therapy Association. They state, horticultural therapy, or HT, uses plants and the natural world to improve the social, spiritual, physical, and emotional well-being of the individuals who participate in it. With certification taking place in universities and colleges across Canada and the US, and in far-flung places like Europe, Asia, South America, it's a really growing profession. And the practitioners, of course, use gardening as well as other outdoors activities to help their patients on the road to recovery. And I have good news for any wannabe gardeners in the audience tonight. You may have noticed that at the beginning of my speech, I said that gardening could be good for you if you had the space or the time. How can this be? Don't you need both? No, actually. I'd like to tell you tonight about 3 really special programs that we have right here in Toronto. The first is called sharingbackyards.com. It's a website that connects willing gardeners without the space to property owners that are just non-gardeners. So it's a win-win situation because they actually split the profits, i.e. the veggies. Now the second one is the Not Far From the Tree program, which reminds me, not far from the tree, easy to remember from Pro Quota's the volunteers have harvested about 8,000 pounds of fruit from Torontonians that just don't have the time to tame that apple, pear, cherry, any other kind of fruit tree that you might have. Now in this case, the fruit actually gets divided into three. Part for the landowner, part for the harvest volunteer, and a third actually goes to the local food bank. So it's a good program to keep in mind if you have any fruit trees. Now the last program I'd like to just briefly mention, again for people without kind of the space, have you ever considered rooftop gardens? There's a program in Toronto called www.cityfarmer.org, and they specialize in organic rooftop gardens. The engineering behind it, although I don't fully understand it, is like fascinating if you ever check it out. And they are able to specialize in some really rare produce, a lot of which they actually sell off to like high-end Toronto restaurants. Now, speaking of high-end, if you ever get the chance to check out the high tea at the Royal York Hotel downtown, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, make sure that you check out their rooftop garden. It's awesome. And the highlight includes, maybe you can see it coming, the Honeymoon Suite, which is a collection of beehives of more than 10,000 bees, where they actually produce honey for all of the restaurants in the hotel. As for me though, I'm content with my little vegetable garden and the goodness it brings to my own life. Whether or not I've convinced anyone to try their own remains to be seen, but I can promise you one thing, gardening is definitely a hobby that grows on me. I'm a Toastmaster.